Ever since its inception in the early 70s, hip-hop has continuously evolved into a wide array of sounds, styles, and subgenres that have led it to being the musical powerhouse that it is today. Whether it's the smooth and socially conscious stylings of the West Coast or the vivid and hard-hitting boom bap of the East, there's no shortage of exciting movements and experiments to delve into when exploring the genre. One particular sound that's seen a ton of success, both commercially and critically, is the inclusion of instruments like saxophones, trumpets, and pianos that you normally hear in jazz music. Given how the fundamental composition of early hip-hop stems from DJing, it's common to hear samples lifted from older records become recontextualized into rap beats, which meant that it was only a matter of time before jazz entered the equation. The term jazz rap was first coined in 1985 when Cargo, a jazz fusion group from the UK, released a single called Jazz Rap Volume 1, and I can only imagine that Volume 2 is hiding out in the same place as Chuck Person's Echo Jams Volume 2 and Doug's Second Movie. While this track might sound dated by today's standards, it's interesting to hear such an early example of something that would become more fully fleshed out in the future. Some other early examples of jazz sampling in hip-hop include various tracks from Stetsasonics In Full Gear, specifically Pen and Paper and Talkin' All That Jazz, which were both produced by the legendary Prince Paul, and even a few cuts from Gang Starr's first album, No More Mr. Nice Guy. By the time we get to the 90s, once hip-hop has long established its place on the mainstream map, the artists who operated in this jazz rap lane were not only seeing a huge boom in popularity, but did a lot to set themselves apart from their contemporaries. You had acts like A Tribe Called Quest and The Pharcyde, who had a more down-to-earth and lighthearted personality, alongside Pete Rock and CL Smooth's more serious edge. However, there was one particular group that was not only able to have a strong personality to stand out from the rest, but embodied the cool and laid-back spirit of the genre like no one else could. I bet you can't guess who I'm talking about. Well, Digable Planets were a pretty short-lived group, only lasting long enough for a couple of albums. Their impact on hip-hop, and particularly jazz rap, is undeniable. Their debut album Reachin', A New Refutation of Time and Space, was not only a commercial success, going gold and having a lead single that won them a Grammy, but was a huge breath of fresh air for hip-hop at the time. Its creative sample flips from the likes of Art Blakey, Herbie Hancock, James Brown, and Curtis Mayfield came together into an immersive experience that felt like witnessing a live jazz band playing for a group of poets who knew how to be socially conscious but have fun at the same time. The flows presented by Ishmael Butler, Craig Irving, and Marianne Vieira, also known as Butterfly, Doodlebug, and Ladybug Mecca respectively, border the line between the rhythmic cadences of rapping and the stilted monologue of spoken word poetry. Combined with they're a really cool group that'll make you want to breakdance and then applaud by snapping afterwards. In fact, if you Google the definition of the word cool, then the first thing that comes up is the music video for Cool Like That. So with such a successful debut under their belt, it's only natural to assume that the group had a long career ahead of them. I mean, you don't just drop such an amazing record that also does well financially and just fall off the face of the earth, right? While apparently Reachin' didn't do well enough, because the follow-up singles Where I'm From and Nickel Bags didn't have nearly as much label support as Cool Like That, and as such didn't chart as high. This didn't stop the group from immediately working on their follow-up album, which would not only have a higher budget, but gave them the artistic freedom to do whatever they wanted, which would be to the album's detriment from a commercial standpoint. Blowout Comb released in 1994, only a year after Reachin', but was unfortunately ignored by the mainstream because of how little the label did to market it. The group then broke up the following year due to creative differences, but the members have gone on to do things in other groups like Shabazz Palaces and Brooksville, and have all put out their own solo record. Oh my god! Despite Blowout Comb's initial lack of commercial success, it's gone on to be the more acclaimed and recognizable album in retrospect. While it isn't that different from their debut on a musical level, carrying a similar selection of samples and the same distinct rap flows, the album is much darker and more hard-hitting from a tonal perspective. It acts as a heartfelt but gritty ode to the boroughs of New York City, but mostly focuses on Brooklyn. Bringing all of this home is not only a fantastic array of samples that pay homage to some of the greatest artists in jazz, soul, funk, and even older hip-hop, but the inclusion of live instrumentation, which was pretty uncommon for the genre at the time. The end result is one of the most nuanced, smooth, and timeless rap records to ever come out of the East Coast. I mean, this could come out today and it wouldn't sound dated. Now, I don't know exactly which instrumental segments were played live and which ones were sampled, but there are lists online that say where all the samples came from, and the album's liner notes have credits that reveal which instruments were played on each track, so that's what I'll be going off of when dissecting the instrumentals. Interestingly enough though, the brass harmonies that kick off and end the record don't seem to be sampled from anywhere, yet there's no credits on the first track to indicate that any live wind instruments were used at all. If any of you know where this section came from, then please leave a comment. Speaking of the first track, the May 4th movement starring Doodlebug sets the tone from a production standpoint with a smooth and slowed down guitar sample that plays off of the boom bappy yet jazzy drum loop to create a perfect marriage between jazz and hip hop. hip-hop. The track's lyrical themes match this too, with a poetic flow that not only emphasizes the themes of protest, like references to the Black Panthers and the discriminatory prison system in America, but finds a way to weave itself alongside lighthearted rap braggadocio. Hell, even the title of the song communicates this, as the May 4th movement is a reference to an anti-imperialist movement in China that sparked due to protests from students on May 4th, 1919. The way that this event is placed right next to starring Doodlebug sets the entire record up to be a loud and unignorable protest presented as a piece of entertainment. This isn't to say that the serious topics that are handled on this record aren't done tastefully, as they certainly are, but the album still likes to have fun with itself without losing focus. A great example of this would be the track Jettin', which not only has a funky beat filled with vibraphones, deep bass, and happiness, but a lyrical ode to living in Brooklyn with themes of black empowerment. Or the album's lead single, Ninth Wonder Blackitalism, which is also backed by a funk sample and even features the legendary DJ Jazzy Joyce. The track acts as a reflection of how the members came up in both their own personal lives and the rap game, riddled with social commentary on what it's like to grow up poor in a capitalist society. The recurring references to black artists, civil rights figures, Chinese leaders, and the Nation of Islam paint a vivid and expressive picture of who all of these poets are and gives the album a distinct personality from nearly everything else in hip-hop at the time. The use of live instrumentation helps as well, as even though the drums are still mostly programmed out of drum breaks like most hip-hop from the 90s, the instrumentals are detailed and full of contrasting sections. Take the track Dog It, for example, which to my knowledge has no samples at all aside from the drums and some vocals on the hook. It opens up with some quick tenor sax licks, which were played by Donald Duck, before a slow and chilled out set of vibraphone notes creep in to complement it, eventually unfolding into its own lead. The two verses on this song from Butterfly and Ladybug are some of my favorites on the album as well. Butterfly starts off his verse establishing the topic of live music as if he's subtly acknowledging that the instrumental he's rapping over was mostly done with live instruments. He then repeatedly talks about popping his junk, which according to Urban Dictionary means talking crazy, talking slick, and starting shit, although it has more dislikes than likes, so I don't know how true that is, but we're gonna go with that anyway. We then get a cool set of bars that continuously allude to and celebrate the history of jazz, continuing the theme of spontaneity in live music before tying it back to the phrase he was repeating earlier. Ladybug's verse is similarly structured, beginning as an appreciation of live musicianship once again, before repeatedly talking about feeling the funk, and I don't need Urban Dictionary for that one. That being said, this verse is a bit more dense than Butterfly's, as Mecca not only talks about music, but how it can be used as a means to stand up against oppression. She then ends her verse with a well said "we linger in the funk," before the song closes out with the two trading bars and playing off of each other really nicely. It's one of the most fun and well executed cuts on the album, showing off the musicianship and dedication that this group has to their craft. Another song that mostly features live instruments, aside from much of the rhythm section, is the calming yet fast-paced Posse cut that is Graffiti. I use the term Posse cut fairly loosely here, as there's only one additional guest MC alongside the three members, but the way the song is structured as an almost Wu-Tang-esque cypher gives it an even deeper sense of camaraderie. Each rapper spits a fairly quick set of bars over a boom-bap beat with a catchy little vibraphone lead, separating each verse with one of the most infectious hooks on the album. The guest performance from Jerry the Damager not only matches the energy of the group perfectly, but continues to play into the track's themes of appreciating hip-hop. As much as I love that this record is as celebratory as it is protestive, I find its more serious moments to be the most resonant. The track Black Ego, for example, despite being the most serious in tone on the record, is easily my favorite song here. It begins with one of the darkest and most dense sample loops that I've heard on any rap record period, rearranging the intro to a Grant Green song into this bleak symphony of low-end strings that are undercut by this quick little guitar lick. Over this is a spoken dialogue between Butterfly and a racist cop whose lines are sampled from Cleopatra Jones, setting up the track's themes of racial injustice. The beat then kicks in with this cymbal-heavy drum break and minimal bass lead, with each rapper's style contrasting and playing off of one another. Ladybug kicks off the track with her laid-back delivery and empowering lyrics, while Doodlebug's quieter tone and paranoid imagery illustrate the reality of the situation. Butterfly gives us the last verse, finding somewhat of a middle ground between these two styles, before the track closes out with a live Grant Green style guitar solo. It's a one-of-a-kind track that genuinely gives me chills every time I hear it. The album ends as strongly as it begins with the track Four Corners, which has one of the most expansive beats on the album. It combines a laid-back groove with psychedelic guitars and acoustic backup and a catchy brass section interpolated from a Roy Ayers song. It plays out similarly to Graffiti, with the different MCs trading off bite-sized verses, and even has guest vocals from Monica Payne and Suleiman the Bronx Ripper. While most of the record up to this point is focused solely on celebrating Brooklyn, this track feels more like an ode to every New York borough due to its grander scope and references found in the lyrics. lyrics. The album then closes out with all of these artists coming together to shout out many of the record's most prominent motifs, before ending with the same set of harmonized brass instruments that opened the record up. Overall, Blowout Comb is possibly the sharpest example of jazz rap to come out of the 90s. Its seamless fusions of sample-based and live instrumentation, smooth rap flows from some of the most poetic MCs of their time, and vivid lyricism that beautifully illustrates Brooklyn come together into an incredible experience that I think any rap fan can at the very least appreciate. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, you know the drill.